morning, everybody. Ooh, spider in my jam jar. Let's get rid of you. It's house spider season if they're appearing everywhere. And we're trying something different this time in that I've got my phone set up, so which might have a better quality camera than doing it via my laptop, but annoyingly means I've got to be portrait, not landscape. So we'll see how it goes, and I can always swap it and change it around another time. Because that's kind of been how we've rolled with all of these sessions, is that we've kind of each time done something differently and decided whether I liked it or not, or whether change it to swap it around for something else. After weeks of going on about the dyeing course now being live, it is now live. It's all set up and ready to go. It's hosted via a learning content platform called Teachable, which is one that a lot of places have used previously. So that's all up and running and ready to go. There's a link in the video description, or if you just head to the website, which is hilltopcloud.co.uk, and go on to online courses, there's a link to sign up to a place, and then I can manually give you access and you can join in with that. So if these videos are sort of kind of gone, oh, dyeing fibre might be quite interesting, there's now a starts at the very beginning, explains what acid dyes are, explains exactly how to use them, all of that sort of stuff. That's now all up and running. So taking you through from the very basics, adding techniques of how to add colour onto fibre, how to get different intensities of colour, how to mix basic primary colours of dye together to end up with a larger palette, talking you through this testing process that I do in these videos a little bit more. And also, what's the other thing that's in there? Oh, there's bits about dyeing gradients, there's bits about dyeing variegated grades, there's bits about dyeing repeating sections of fibre, and it's all really focused on just on dyeing fibre. There's no yarn techniques. So it's doing what I know really well and what I do really well, and doing that over and over again. So with all that being said, let's get started on this month's seasonal changes collection. So the one that people chose for us to do this time is called Damp Leaves, which was the top photo, and it's the one of a leaf. Oh, I think we might be pushing my internet connection to its limits here. Oh, work via that one. That will work better. Help if the because I've got Wi-Fi in the studio, and it would help if the laptop had picked up the studio Wi-Fi and not the really weak Wi-Fi that's all the way over in the house. So therefore, probably not the ideal one to use. Let's try that again. There we go. That's working a little bit quicker. So it's the top one of it's the large photo of a leaf on a sort of darkish decking. So it's kind of, we're going for a charcoal, a minty aqua colour, a mustard with a hint of chartreuse to it, a kind of tan brown, and then what I've called a conker brown of the shoe polish to kind of colour brown. So we're going to start off by dyeing the darkest colours first. I like to start off darkest and go lighter generally, and we're going to go for, it's a charcoal colour, browny black. I'm probably going to put a little undertint of blue into it, because I think that's going to sit quite nicely in the colour palette. So when I put the images up on the Fellowship of Yarn to start thinking about what they're going to do, they're all user generated colour palettes, and quite often what I then do is start changing them around slightly, because I think they're going to work better. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's change the camera around so you can see slightly, because I know some people went, oh, I want to see a bit more about what you do with my new dye dispensers. We need to go around this way. There we go. Oh, sorry, that was a bit wobbly. Yeah, so these are what I put in my new studio for. They're really good for how I work with huge quantities of dye. If you're only doing smaller amounts, they're probably not quite so useful because they're bar optics, and each optic dispenses 25 millilitres of dye. So it's good for big quantities, less good if you're working on small quantities and you need to be quite precise about those small quantities. So let's have a look at that. So I've just added in my dye into there. I need to write it down. So that was black, and I used a tiny little bit of grey in there just to blue it up slightly because my black dye is slightly purple toned. So we've just added a little bit of blue into it, and it's just given us quite a generic, nice dark looking black. The other thing, do I want to change that slightly at all? Do I want some brown? No, because we've got brown going into lots of other colours. So that black's quite straightforward. We ended up with something quite dark, a little bit of a blue undertone, lots of dye in there, so it's going to give us a nice intense dark colour. Let's have a look at, let's go for our other next darkest one, which is going to be a dark brown. So I've got this one in this container here because it's a dye colour that I'm using up the last of. It's not going to be one that I carry on having and using, but I've got enough of it to definitely dye for the rest of this month. But I think it's going to give us the dark brown perfectly. So if I just stick a dot of it on there and we take a look at that, we can see, so we've got double layer. Everything at the moment is covered in red ink in the studio because I've been printing the bags for 12 days of Christmas. So that's going to be our brown, and it's pretty much perfect straight out of the container. So sometimes I mix dyes up, but sometimes for things like brown, sometimes they're just the right colour. So these I'm measuring out just using syringes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so we've got 140 of red brown, because that way I know which one it is, because I have two browns. If this isn't the brown dye that I like best, it was a brown dye that I ended up ordering by accident of it, and I'm still using up, but it's not the one that I generally use most of the time because it's a little bit red and toned, but that's perfect for what we want for this particular colour. We want that kind of rich redness to it. Right, looking at the image again, so if I bring that over, let's have a look. So we've done the two colours on either end, which are our darkest ones, and we're just working our way through into the middle ones of this reference here. So I never claim that I'm dyeing exact colour matches because it's really hard to do that, and in my experience, even when you think you've done it, by the time it's gone onto the fibre, it's been heat set, it's then been dried, the base tone of the colour is slightly different. You never end up actually dyeing the colour that you think you've dyed. So I always go for creating a palette that I like the look of. Let's do this chartreuse mustard. So I'm going to go for the lemon yellow, which is the more cool toned yellow. Let's have 25 of you. Now yellow's quite a weak colour when used in combination with the ones. It doesn't tend to shine through very strongly. So we've got the lemon yellow, but then I'm also going to want to put in, I'm going to use a little bit of brown, but I'm going to use my other brown dye, and I'm also going to use a little bit of the olive colour that I've got, but I'm not going to want a full 25 millilitres. So yeah, so when I'm just dyeing non-repeatable colours, I don't bother about pulling off bits and measuring smaller quantities. I'll just go for half an optic is about 10 millimetres. If I want slightly less than that, you can just sort of squeeze in a tiny splash of colour. but because for these they're dyed as repeatable colours, they need to be accurate, and that means I have to measure them out for the smaller amounts. So we had, is that going to be the too loose a syringe? That one's nearly worn out. Find a newer one. So eventually the plastic on the syringes starts to just get a little bit worn out, and they don't pull up the dye very well. So at that point they go off and they get recycled. So let me write down the lemon that I put in. And that's our brown. Let's go for 2 brown. So I'm not going to need to add very much of these other colours in order to just change the colour of this bright lemon yellow. So 2 brown. And 2 of olive. And then this is going to need some water going in, because this is going to be one of our paler colours. So in order to get the dye to spread out over our fibre, we have to add water. There we go. So we've now ended up with this chartreusey, mustardy kind of yellowy colour. And I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's going to work pretty well for what we want. So let me write that down. 2 brown, 2 olive. We then have got 2 colours left. We've got the minty aqua, and we've got the kind of ochre-y type shade. So let me have a think about the ochre colour. It's quite a warm brown, and it's got quite a lot of yellow in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and use the brown that I say I don't use very much of. And this is going to be it's going to be our mid-tone. So when I dye the seasonal changes packs, they're always dyed as some darks, some lights and some mid-tones, and that means when you come to use them for colour work, you've got not just colour contrast, but you've also got tonal contrast, and that's the thing that means you can use them for different motifs and they will actually stand out from one another. If you dye everything with the same intensity of dye, they all the colours, even if they're quite contrasting of the opposite colours on the colour wheel, they all look the same. A red of the same intensity and a green of the same intensity don't actually stand out against one another very well. You need to have light and dark as well. So let's go for 40 of this quite reddy toned brown, and then 25 of our daffodil yellow. So instead of the cool toned yellow, daffodil yellow is a much warmer colour yellow. And let's have a look at that. So that's not quite right. It's not, we've not got enough of the yellow gone into it yet. It's getting there, but it's not had enough of an impact. So we'll put in another 25 of the yellow. And if that doesn't work, we'll have to start afresh with less brown, I think is what we're going to have to do, because it's a little bit too dark in comparison to the other colours. So let's discard that one, go back to the beginning and go for just 20 of our ready coloured brown. 25 of our yellow. So you can see how the yellow doesn't really have that much of an impact on the quite strong colours like the brown. Slightly more clear what's going on as it's the dye colour spread out, but I'm still going to go for, luckily nothing in that one, I'm going to go for another 25 of daffodil. So now this is mostly yellow with a hint of brown. Okay, and it's funny thing is it doesn't look like it's having a massive change on the colour, even though you're changing it quite significantly. So, but I'm going to go with my dye's instincts and go, that's going to be okay. in person rather than over the camera, there is starting to be subtle differences between these shades. So let me write that down. So that we can repeat it again for later. So yeah, so that one is, it doesn't look very promising as a contrast on the kitchen paper, and particularly over the screen, but there is quite a subtle difference between the two. So our final colour that we need to dye is we need to dye the minty aqua colour. Now these are really tricky colours to manage to dye from only primaries. I was teaching workshop down at East Sussex Guild 2 weekends ago, and there was somebody chatting to me about trying to dye an aqua colour, and she was having real difficulties with it, in part because the turquoise dye is one of the hardest to exhaust, but it also has a very different setting temperature to the yellow dyes, so if you're not careful you end up with quite a lot of dye splitting. But I'm going to use, I've got this jade green dye, but I don't want a full 25 of it, so I'm going to pull some of that off. Let's move you out of the way because you are no longer required. Let's find another syringe. Let's go for 5 of you. So this is 5 of, it's a it's a proper jade green basically. And it's a very strong colour, which is why I'm using quite such a small amount of it, because this jadey aqua colour is going to be the palest colour in our set. It wants being ever so slightly closer to green, so I'm going to go in with my olive colour and add in 1 millimetre of that. Let's add some water so that we're a bit more dilute. Give it a good swirl around. Let's see where we're at. Oh, this helps if we don't do it. We've got some yellow hiding in there from the end of the fork. There we go. So that's got us somewhere not a million miles away. What do I think about that? I think that's going to be probably just about right. Let's have another quick look at it. Yeah, that's going to work for us. So it's been quite painless this time. Some people who've watched the other videos will sometimes know that we can go backwards and forwards a few times with a few colours. We've only had one dye pot that we've rejected outright as going, no, that's not going to work. So that'll just be put to one side and saved for, I'll use it up on another set of fibre later. So these are all going to go onto Cambrian Wool. Cambrian Wool, which I'm sure most of you know about by now, is a cross between a Blueface Leicester and a Welsh Mountain Sheep. It's called a Welsh Mule, which is basically a mule in British sheep farming, is a crossbreed between any hill sheep and a Blueface Leicester. It produces bigger size sheep with a longer, more lustrous fleece, so there's more meat on them for the meat market, and more fleece on them to go off to the wool marketing board. And the Cambrian Wool project select the very best of the fleeces each year, and they get sent off to Yorkshire to be washed and processed. Most of it gets turned into knitting yarn, and a bit of it gets left as comb top, which is what I dye. And it's a fraction higher micron count than standard Blueface Leicester, but it's got a little bit more crimp and body and loft to it. It's what I class as a really good multi-purpose wool. You can use it for just about anything. you're very sensitive, you might struggle with it right round your neck, but I'm okay with it as in cold weather as being an extra skin fibre. It's great for garments because the long staple length means it doesn't pill. So that's our black. So basically this fibre went into soap yesterday, and it was just in standard water. Nothing fancy, a little bit of washing up liquid just to help reduce the surface tension slightly. And then it's had the dye poured on, evenly spread. This is the useless syringe, so we need to go for double lots of citric acid, and I must remember to put that into the recycling. So the citric acid is just what's needed to help the dye set onto the fibre. So it creates mildly acidic conditions, and it's what causes the dye to make permanent bonds with the wool itself. And then it gets heated up, and at high temperatures the dye molecules form the bonds with the wool. So what's the next one? So once you've kind of done the colour development on these, the dyeing is reasonably straightforward. And I'm just laying the fibre out in a sort of zigzaggy shape just to spread it out as much as possible. Right, that was our black. This is going to be our dark chestnutty brown. Clear a little bit of space so you can see slightly better. There we go. So this wool's slightly creamy in nature, like most wools are really, and it just give a slightly warmer undertone to some of the colours. And you can be quite rough with the wool, providing you're pushing down, you're not rubbing and you're not being rough with it on the surface. You can push down on it and it will be absolutely fine. So we're just trying to make sure the dye is as evenly spread out as possible. I mean, we're not aiming for absolute solid even colours here. It's a semi-solid method rather than a solid tone. A little bit of variation is fine, but we do want mostly even. Okay, so that's the dark brown. Next we've got our chartreusey mustard kind of colour. Which is this one. Might have needed a little bit more water in it, but we shall make it work. So if you don't have enough liquid, volume of liquid, it can be really hard to get the dye to spread out completely evenly. So yeah, so sorry if it's a bit clangy, banky. The table's cold, which means it makes a lot of noise. Even just transfer the dye about by squeezing it out and spreading it round. That's better. because it's that compromise. We don't want too much liquid, because otherwise when we roll them up in the cling film you just end up with water gushing everywhere. But we do need enough liquid to actually be able to get the dye to spread evenly. Rolled up nice and evenly. So next up we've got our yellowy brown colour that we sort of spent so long trying to decide how much brown versus how much yellow. The end slightly tangled up, so let's see what this ends up looking like on fibre. One of the things that I can always do, and I did it last month actually, was that there was a yellow colour that I couldn't decide whether I wanted a really bright colour or a mustardy colour. So after I'd finished filming I actually went back and dyed as another option, wrote down the recipe for that one as well, and looked at them in the dry fibre to decide which I thought worked better as the colour palette, because sometimes it's really hard to judge them on wet fibre. Everything always looks darker when it's wet, because more of the colour is reflected back, whereas once you've dyed it and then the fibre's dry, the colours tend to be a little bit more muted. They look less dark, a little bit more vibrant, a little bit paler. And that's particularly true of yellows. They always look darker in the fibre form. So there we go. That's that. This is the yellow that we've just dyed up. So if we look at that compared to our test sheet, you can see how as we were testing it, we gradually made it more and more and more yellow. But even compared to comparing the kitchen roll to the bit of fibre, this seems much paler, which is what I knew that was what was going to happen, because I've done this enough times to know that this is looking really dark, but if I carry on trying to add more and more yellow and make it even paler, I'm going to end up with something that's not an ochre colour. It's going to be yellow. So hopefully that's going to come out roughly the right colour. And then finally we've got our minty aqua colour. These have just had all the most of the water squeezed out of them, sort of, so they are damp rather than wringing wet. Okay, and then this is our minty greeny colour. On there. So yeah, so at the moment my dye studio is doubling as a print studio, because I'm slowly printing up batches of bags for this year's 12 Days of Christmas parcels, which hopefully the first batch will be on sale at the beginning of next week, probably at the same time as I get this October seasonal changes pack up in the shop. So it's a bag with a hand printed design on it. This time it's a dragon in very bright gorgeous red, and you get 100 grams of hand dyed luxury fibre, and then you get, and that's to open on Christmas Day, and then each of the following days you get 20 grams of superfine merino and silk in a coordinating palette, shall we say. And they're a really nice sort of Christmas through to just past New Year treat. But as a result, I have got bags upon bags of lined up trying to compete with fibre for space. Particularly because the ink on the first batch of bags, for some mystifying reason, refused point blank to dry. And it's the same ink I've always used, the same bags that I've always used. Don't know what's gone on with them. So I did the second batch yesterday and they were already drier than the first batch. So I have no idea what's happened there. But as a result, I've got a lot of red ink bags smearing around the place. Okay, that is our colour palette for this time. So we bring that all over here. So this is what we were aiming for with our colour choices. If I just pull my glove off so I can actually use the trackpad. Make that a little bit bigger. So that's what we're aiming up to get. And we have got, that is our charcoal, that is our minty colour, this is going to be our mustardy chartreuse, this is our ochre, and that's going to be our brown. So that's our colour palette for this time. So those are going to go and they're going to be heat set until the dye has made its permanent bond with the fibre. And then I'm going to crack on with getting some, or dyeing some yak today. And as I say, these should be in the shop hopefully beginning of next week, along with the very first batch of 12 Days of Christmas parcels, providing the ink on the bag just dries. So yeah, so I hope you've all enjoyed that. If you would like to get to know a bit more about hand dyeing fibre and you think it sounds interesting, it's something I've tried and not been very good at, or I've dyed yarn but never dyed fibre, the link to the course is in the description. You might have to click on more to scroll down to see the rest of them come through. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. So yeah, the dark rolls look a little bit like sushi. Yeah, with the with seaweed in them, they do have a vague sushi appearance, Andrea. You are quite right. So yeah, so the recording of this, if you ever want to watch it back again to see it being done, or you want to share it with anybody, the same link that you used will let you access a recording of it. Hope you've all enjoyed that. Have a lovely weekend, and I shall see you all online at some point soon.